Good morning, everyone. You're very welcome to the launch of Visioning the Future, Artistic Doctorates in Ireland. So we're really excited to launch this research project this morning. We are going to both introduce the general research project and also specifically to launch the online seminar series, which starts today and carries on Thursday, and for another 13 sessions during the summer and into the early October. So Visioning the Future Artistic Doctorates in Ireland is focused on artistic doctorates in dance, music, theatre and film and screen media. I'm Jules Gilson and I'm Professor of Creative Practice at University College Cork in Ireland, and I'm also head of the School of Film, Music and Theatre here at UCC. So I wanted first of all just to introduce our research team. So whilst we're based at UCC, we're very much a national project, and we genuinely hope that the resources and the research and this online seminar series will actively contribute to a richer community of artistic research PhDs in Ireland and in Europe. We have our postdoctoral research, Inés Bento Coelho, the three heads of department here at UCC. That's Barry Monaghan, head of film and screen media, Trianan Hio-Hoyne, who is head of music, Yvonne Bonenfant, who is head of theatre, and our research assistant, Michael Ryan, who is actively behind the scenes here. Also, as well as being based at UCC in Ireland, this project is operated in collaboration with IMBAS, which is the Irish Forum for Artistic Research. And IMBAS are hosting two sessions in September, one in early September, which is a general introduction to IMBAS, and another one in later September on the 22nd, which is one that's focused specifically on supports during the current COVID-19 emergency. So this seminar series is part of the larger research project, and all of these sessions will be recorded and they will be available afterwards on our website, and some of this material may be used for research purposes. So I wanted to say briefly just something about what's going to happen today. I'm giving just a very short general introduction. I'll pass over to Inés in a moment, and then we'll have, again, short introductions from the different disciplinary perspectives from our different heads and members of our research team. And then it's really a session that's for you and for the community of people who have come to this seminar today. So we're really interested in who you are, in why you've come here today, and we'd love to hear from you. So if in the chat section you'd be willing and interested to tell us your name and your affiliation, we would love that. Thank you. Okay, so Ireland has a population of nearly 5 million in 2020. We're a small European country, and currently we have 12 third-level institutions offering artistic research PhDs in dance, film, music and theatre, and different combinations of those. This research project then is specifically focused on trying to find a way for our community to come together and to strengthen, and to focus that on perspectives from teachers, supervisors, students and examiners, and anyone else who's interested in policy and strategy within Ireland. We want to make connections across Europe and beyond, and we want to impact our national protocol and our strategy. We come at a really extraordinary moment. We are online because of the COVID-19 emergency, but that's also given us a great deal of opportunity, I think, to connect further afield and to understand the complex interweavings between the performing arts and film and screen media, which is at the heart of what we're interested in looking at. It comes at a time when ELIA has last week issued the Vienna Declaration, a policy paper advocating for the full recognition of artistic research across Europe. And we're really excited to have input from Andrea Breit, ELIA President, who will discuss artistic research in film with us on the 16th of July. We also very much are connected and have sprung off from other research and projects that have completed recently or are in process, particularly the Artistic Doctorates in Europe programme, which was an Erasmus Plus programme led by Vida Migelo from Middlesex University. And Vida will be with us on the 11th of August to talk about that research project and doctoral provision in dance. And similarly, the Erasmus Plus project Advancing Supervision for Artistic Research Doctorates, which is current and based at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, is also a very important part of what we're doing. And Michaela Glantz will be introducing that project on her session on the 20th of August. So with no further ado, I would like to pass over to my wonderful postdoctoral research, Ines Bento Coelho. Ines.
Good morning, everyone. It is fantastic to be here today with Jules Gilson, launching the Visioning the Future project and our online seminar series. My name is Ines. I'm a postdoctoral researcher, and I've got a practice-based PhD in visual arts and dance from the Glasgow School of Art. Today, I'm going to introduce the Visioning the Future project, its main three strands. We began in initial stages by looking at the PhD regulations and handbooks in departments delivering artistic doctorates in theatre, dance, music, film and screen media across Ireland to get a sense of an initial picture of the diverse range of practices in PhD provision taking place across the country. The project is now moving on to the second stage of exploring the field, and we will be doing that by having an online seminar series, which we are introducing here today, which is meant to be an open international affair. And in parallel, we will be running a series of interviews. So in this online seminar series, we want to find out and to explore what is happening in the wider European landscape. That will be what we will be exploring mostly in part one. Then we will turn our focus to what are the current challenges and the successful practices that are taking place in our context in Ireland, and that will be part two. In part three, we'll take input from the student body, and then finally we aim to close by exploring and finding out what do we need to do to move forward in terms of developing support for artistic research doctorates. In parallel to that, we will be conducting interviews with staff and students across Ireland in order to find out more what exactly is happening and the challenges and the practices in different places. So we'll be aiming to speak with heads of departments, supervisors, examiners, students in the later year of their studies. So if this happens to be you, please get in touch. We would love to hear from you. So these two strands, the online seminar series and the interviews, are aimed to inform the final stage of the project, which is the development of open educational resources, which will be available for supervisors, examiners, and students. And they aim to focus on how we might enhance the PhD provision in artistic doctorates in performing arts and film and screen media. They will be available online for everyone, anywhere on our website around December, January, so do keep an eye on the website and make use of them. Finally, I would just like to mention that the Visioning the Future project aims to also contribute to ongoing discussion on how we might develop support for artistic doctorates, as well as the current work being done in terms of developing advocacy for the legitimacy of artistic research as a rigorous form of research and practice. Now, I would also like to open the questions and answers. You've got a little button on your screen which says Q&A, and if there's anything you'd like to raise, a question, a concern, a topic you would like us to explore, feel free to go ahead and write us a note, and then we'll pull up these questions. Finally, I would like to pass on to Barry Monaghan, who is the head of film and screen media at University College Cork. Thank you. Barry, on to you.
Thanks very much, Ines, and welcome to everybody, the participants from, I can see, quite a geographical spread, so it's great to have so many people interested in this dialogue, and we hope to learn as much from the dialogue as we might be able to give you in terms of information and our experience so far. In film and screen media, as the most recent department to join the school, we're very much learning. We're very much at an exciting stage in the process of embarking upon what this question is, how not necessarily a relationship can be formed between the ideas of creativity and the academic institution, because I would hope that every intellectual endeavor is creative in one way or another, but how discipline-specific creativity can in some way form a relationship with more traditional academic structures, more traditional academic ways of assessment and testing. And I suppose we are learning early on that it's sometimes a problem of language, that when we say thesis or dissertation, we mean something that makes a lot of sense in an academic context, in a traditional academic context, but that it isn't something that sits as well with various forms of creativity and creative practice. And that's something we're trying to get our heads around. Certainly, if we peel away what it is we do in film and screen media in a creative way and look at creativity as both a product and a process, we have two main options in quite a reductive way, but hopefully it's a useful starting point that we might unpack in discussion later. And that is fiction or non-fiction in terms of output, in terms of productivity and production. And for us, at least anyway, in initial discussions, we've found that where ideas reside is very different if you look at fictional making and non-fictional filmmaking. So what I mean by that is the idea of an idea or an argument or something that more traditionally relates to a thesis, PhD work as we know it, is more easily found in a non-fiction, where the author is expressing an idea, laying out an argument, and hopefully convincing people or allowing them to think through that argument in a personal way. The ideas and the sense of an argument are more, I would say, latently embedded in a fictional piece that might invite more flexibility of deconstruction or analysis or assessment. So that's our first kind of binary, our first question, and the first hurdle that I hope that in dialogue with many people who will be participating, including those in other disciplines, might be able to guide us through or give us some inspiration on. There's always, I suppose, a sense lurking behind that the apparatus academically for assessment, after all, if it's going to end up as a pass or a fail at the end, we need to know how rigorous and how robust the academic apparatus is in its relationship to the creative process. And this isn't to protect academia, this is to protect the very project that we're embarking upon here. If somebody is going to be deemed to have passed, horrible a word as that might be in application to the creative process, we need to know what that is, and we need to be able to justify it robustly and defend as much as traditionally PhD scholars defend their thesis. So the academic situation and personnel are now being asked to defend the reasoning, the rationale behind how they might adjudicate a creative piece that is expressing a set of ideas. So that's a general run around some of the ideas that we're looking at and that we're really excited about getting into dialogue with people who probably by virtue of provenance and by virtue of the institutions that people are at the moment are already a decade or more into in terms of their exploration. Well, we're way behind you, but our ears and eyes are open and we're quite excited about learning from you. So delighted to be involved in this and really excited about participating in a dialogue with everybody else who is too. Thanks a million. Now I'm going to pass you over to Trina, who is head of the Department of Music, and good luck.
Thank you, Barry. I just want to check that everybody can hear me. Thank you. I'm Trina Nihachain, and I'm the head of the Department of Music here at UCC. And I suppose from within the discipline of music, I'm just very excited about this initiative. And I think that so much is going to come of this exploration, and particularly the methodology that is being employed by Ines and by Jules in this. So thank you for your work, and I really look forward to engaging in this process further. Within music, I suppose the most established form of creative practice research would be that of composition, and it's around a very long time, and we have a lot of experience of those sorts of doctorates. Because my own specialism is in oral tradition, in Irish traditional music, historical song composers, which of course continue to experience contemporary moments because their work lives in living traditions. I'm particularly interested in the other ways in which the question of an artistic doctorate will contribute to how we conceptualize the intelligentsia in the larger sense, how we conceptualize thought particularly. And my feeling on this is that an artistic doctorate and how we understand that and how we position that within our institutions creates a space of huge potentiality, in the sense that if we were to take oral tradition, for example, one could argue that oral tradition within the larger academic framework is, in a Foucauldian sense, representative of a disqualified knowledge. And so for me, engaging in artistic doctorate programs and in the whole question of artistic research is about unsettling those narratives of what a thesis is and what a written thesis performs when we compare to what artistic research might perform or unearth, or perhaps what space artistic research will actually create for otherwise hidden voices. So I'm particularly interested in concepts such as embodied orality and the idea that there are knowledges of the body that go far beyond what the written word could ever tell us, for example. And so in the larger sense, I feel that artistic research is an important space within both an Irish and an international context in relation to these subaltern knowledges, as it were, these other ways of thinking and doing, and how the knowing of performing or the knowing of the body can, in a very tangible way, feed into how we conceptualize thought. And because of that, I think in an Irish context, this is just as important for questions of post-colonialism or enduring colonialities and so forth. And so I'm quite excited to, as my colleagues have mentioned, learn more from you about what artistic research can entail and the exciting places it can bring us. And it just strikes me in relation to what Barry just mentioned before me about rigorous processes of examination and how to stand over results and what is this going to look like in an examining context. That is actually also at the heart of these larger questions of contestation and other voices. And one of the questions is, and I suppose I'd refer to John Miles Foley's his famous title, a very performative title of a book entitled How to Read an Oral Poem. The question is, how do we find the examiners with the language with which to examine artistic research? And how can we frame this language so that our institutions understand the value of these contributions while still ensuring that space, that particular creative space that this particular sector has to offer? So I'll leave it at that for the moment, and I'll hand you over to my colleague, Dr. Yvonne Bonenfant, who's head of the theatre department here at UCC.
Thank you so much, Trina. Theater has a really interesting and particular relationship with artistic research and research through practice. theater is a historically maligned and disdained art form for a number of reasons, depending, of course, on what territory you come from, in the sense that there has tended to be a very strong divide between understanding theater as a source of knowledge and wider knowledge because of the contingency and ever-changing nature of performing bodies and what they mean and do. And the idea, building on what Trina has just raised, that which the body does is by necessity not analyzable and not understandable and not real knowledge. Now, of course, these questions have been addressed inside the methodologies that have emerged from many territories, and I'm going to speak about territories in a moment. But in different ways, and practice inclusive research processes are really important to militate for as a part of what the academy can do for the wider world and how the academy does it for the wider world. In terms of PhDs, I'm a strangely experienced PhD examiner, because one of the things that the theatrical realm of artistic research offers to the wider artistic research world is that we are stuck with interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity at most of the time. And we're stuck with hybridizations. And that is as true of dance theater and dance as it is of theater itself. And that being stuck with that intermedial and transmedial quality of the theatrical and of performance practices means that we are in a space to offer something very particular to that discourse. So I go back to my examination experience. I've been asked to examine, because my own subspecialty, which is about the relationship between vocality and intermediality, has led me to be in demand for examining PhDs that are, for want of a better term, constructively weird. And I mean that in the best sense, not in the negative sense. In other words, they're hybridizing knowledge worlds in ways that academia usually doesn't, or usually doesn't do very well. Why am I so interested in what theater has to offer and what this discourse can do? And I'll talk about the Irish context in a moment. But before I do, there are so many questions that are still up in the air around the relationship between artistic research, knowledge production, our relationship to artists in the art world. We can be stuck in a world where both the world of the conservatory doesn't value artistic research because it's not professional practice, in quotation marks, and where academia doesn't value artistic research, or mainstream university systems don't value it because it's not proper thought. And in my experience, what's really interesting is that some of our most concerted enemies can often be from the humanities rather than from other fields, where there can be a tradition, depending on the case of the researcher, of seeing knowledge production as necessarily disembodied, particularly in the realm of philosophy. What we saw for a long time in the theatrical realm was an ever-decreasing and dissolving sparring with established humanities disciplines that debated whether research through practice had unique qualities to offer to the wider theatrical knowledge sphere. I think in many territories that battle is completely over, and it's really exciting that that battle is completely over. Why does practice as research through performance matter? Why does artistic research through performance matter? I love citing two of the assertions of Patricia Levy, an American scholar of what she would call research through art. What particularly performative practices research does so well is it can handle how meanings can be evoked rather than merely delineated and described in cold, non-vocalic terms. And it also can deal with yoking together really profound opposites and real complexities both of these qualities are really important to the contemporary world. They're super important to us understanding how we deal with the rate of change we're facing and the rate of social transition, hybridization and conflicts within and across world cultures, all of the performative aspects of politics that are that have been brought to the fore in recent years in so many ways. Theatrical approaches to artistic research and performance studies can really grapple with this multiplicity of meanings and try to braid together rivulets of meaning from their seemingly contradictory components. I like to quote Gertrude Stein when I think about practices, research, and performance, some of whose politics were appalling, but in her own way, who was a really interesting aesthetic pioneer who, when asked by a journalist why her writing was so inscrutable, replied, "My writing is as clear as mud, but out of mud runs clear rivulets and streams of clear water." And I think that muddiness is what we have to offer to the research world, where so much can't be cut and dried. I'll stop there right now. So I'm very excited that this is taking place, and I'm very excited that we are working inside Irish culture, which has a lineage of relationship to performativity and resistance that is very particular, very interesting, and there's much to be developed in that area in terms of valuing that specific strand that can come to the fore, particularly when facing anti-colonial and decolonization dynamics. So Jules also asked me to speak briefly about the European context. And so I'll speak about that for a second, because I'm really interested and passionate in this. I've been involved with what was once, where I was last working, practices research for a long time. And, you know, practice as research, artistic research, practice-led research, practice-inclusive research, the artistic sciences, les sciences de l'art, recherche, création. You've seen all of these names in different methodological literatures if you follow this sphere. And so often what's happened is that this thrust toward bringing the knowledge creation aspects of artistic practice to the fore has come into collision with what governments and universities and conservatories want from us. Yet people have insisted on it repeatedly. And what that means is that there have had to be a lot of local solutions to I'm meaning dealing with a local education system, if that's national or subnational, depending on where you live in the world, or municipal. But that's meant that artistic research has come into conflict or had to negotiate a relationship with funding systems, with status and prestige systems inside both academic worlds and art worlds that are often on an exclusively national level. But thanks to the emergence of the Society for Artistic Research, really the first, as far as I'm concerned, truly pan-national and multicultural or a properly multicultural movement toward trying to incorporate multiple approaches to artistic research. We are on the cusp of being able to, in Europe, you know, after Ilya's declaration last week, we're on the cusp of being able to really band together to show why our work matters. And what's so difficult about that challenge is one of the most exciting things about artistic research so far across the world has been its sense of being in development, of being an emerging discipline. And one of the challenges as we move into a more European constellation will be how to keep that sense of constant development alive, rather than this field fossilizing like other methodological discourses. It's far from that right now. All of that being said, from a doctoral perspective, a really important consideration for me right now is to really think about the employability prospects of the students that are graduating from PhDs in artistic research fields right now. So many of those prospects are transnational, like other academic fields right now. And it's really important that PhD students be empowered to understand how their PhD framework functions inside their territory that they're living and working in, but also how it enables them to militate for what matters inside their creative and academic impulses in the wider European context, so that there can be mobility and exchange for our PhD students, both while they're studying and afterwards. And it is of course, completely worth recognizing the emerging funding streams that are coming from Horizon Europe, that are coming from some national research funding networks, the doubling of funding to Creative Europe, all of these attempts to revalue the artistic on a pan-European scale and to move what was once, when it was called practices research in some countries, a movement that was happening a lot in the Anglosphere. But let's remember, of course, that that movement in the Anglosphere was preceded by very strong movements in Finland, the country that pioneered artistic research doctorates outside of music composition, but that the wider European context for artistic research allows us to move outside of one linguistic thought world and really engage with what intercultural and trans-linguistic approaches have to offer the contingency or the incredibly vocalic contingent nature of knowledge creation. I'll stop there and pass over to my wonderful colleague, Professor Jules Gilson, who will take forward the question and answer.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you for that lively presentation. And thank you also, colleagues Trina and Barry and Ines. What we're going to do now is we're going to shift to speaking to you. And because we're just beginners at this technical system today, we're not going to do that live, as in people speaking. But once we get better at that, we might do that, hopefully next week. So right now, if you have questions, Ines will be fielding those. And please do keep them coming. And we'll try and fit in as many as we can. So I'm going to pass over to Ines, who's going to field those questions.
Okay, so there is not much of a question, but more of a comment in terms of knowing how is it possible to know and understand the complexities of both assessment and methodological frameworks, as in this seems like a big question, it seems like one of the large topics for us to tackle on, but I guess it feeds on a little bit on some of our points on the challenges of assessment. So I was just wondering if one of you would like to say something about the complexities of assessments and methodologies that we are faced with.
Ines, I might just jump in there just with a very slight comment that in our earlier exploration of that idea exactly, it seems that there's both a moral and an ethical center in how you think through this. I mean, the first question is the extent to which it's, I wouldn't say legitimate, but all right to take a creative piece that in some ways might be incredibly subjectively riven and woven and created with a very emotional or profoundly connected to the self core, and forgive my inarticulate way of putting that, and to think that that is going to be put through some cold machinery that in some way adjudicates on its being okay to a certain standard is for me, you know, as a moral question there at the center. And yet it's something that we have to agree to do. We have to find the language to do that. And we have to be assured that we're okay doing this. And I've heard amazingly complicated examples from external advisors on creative practice PhDs, which really touched upon this in a very problematic way and were very challenging. So I suppose that's the first kind of question. And the second is in relation to some kind of sense that ultimately it's the academic institution that needs a flexibility here to assure itself that the endorsement that it's giving, that the endorsement that's being sought by the creative practitioner is what is understood in the first place to be wanted, that this is what this person wants, and also that it facilitates, I suppose, whether it's in the background or the foreground, an approach to a different career path, perhaps. Or an opening of another, whether that means becoming a third level teacher or a lecturer on the back of this qualification. So they're just the two ways. Again, apologies for the openness of that remark, but I'd like to hear what other people feel about that as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Barry. Yvonne, Trina, did you have any comments that you wanted to mention about that?
Yeah, I have a comment not directly related to Barry, so I can leave that if somebody else wants to pick up on the issue of assessment particularly.
Yvonne, did you want to come back on assessment, or shall I pass to Trina? You need to unmute. Can you unmute?
Yes, sorry, I had accidentally covered my mute button with another window. Apologies to everyone there. Assessment is in my view, one of the endless and unending debates. And in the theatrical and dance realms and wider performance and interdisciplinary artistic doctorate realms, in areas I've been involved with, it's been an ongoing, at some points battle, at some points happy dialogue. And much of this is about institutional politics, and much of this is about who's asking the questions about whether a work is of quality and of PhD-able quality and what isn't. One of the frameworks that I personally like to apply to the question of quality and assessment of artistic doctorates is the thing that I really value from the scientific model of the doctorate is the notion that a doctorate is a place to experiment. What the touchy issues that brings up is when we experiment artistically, the aesthetic product can be very disappointing for us and very displeasing from a taste perspective to a spectator. So finding ways to value the work of experimentation that values both the highly successful and the failed experiments within assessment, artistic experiments, is one of the great challenges and one of the wonderful pieces of fun, because it requires examiners and thinkers to use their artistic improvisatory capacity to question what they actually value about an aesthetic product and to question the Foucauldian values that police taste. That's my view.
Thank you, Yvonne. Trina, did you want to come back on this or something?
Yeah, so this is, maybe related in a sort of an éclairant kind of way. So I think that when it comes to assessment, there is actually, and I'm going to refer to Foucault again just because I'm copying Yvonne, but there is a question of diversity of subjectivities in the question of assessment. And I suppose I just wanted to raise that. So I suppose it might be more common in artistic research for people to expect, a strong sense of a distinctly Western, modern, individualized expression of subjectivity, or people might not expect that, but maybe it is more common. And so when you come to artistic practices that maybe push the bounds of how we understand modern subjectivity, I think that poses a challenge for us in our methodology. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I think for this reason, I think that, say, for example, an artistic doctorate in traditional arts, it's quite likely that would be inherently collaborative rather than highly individualized in lots of ways. So this might mean, for example, that there is a fieldwork element or a collaborative community-based element that's feeding into the students' understanding of their own creative practice, but at the same time sort of defying what we understand as individual in a modern sense. And because of that, I could see methodologies being developed for doctorates in the traditional arts that might look a bit different or might have different criteria applied to them when it comes to examining. And so I'm not actually, unfortunately, offering any tangible solution to this. I'm just asking some of the questions myself, essentially. But that would be my concern, is this contested and contestable space and the issue of these kind of diverse subjectivities, following on from what Yvonne was saying about different linguistic knowledges and the experiential knowledge of different languages and different cultures. To me, I think that's going to pose challenges, but I actually believe that there will be a solution to all of these things that will ultimately enrich how we understand thought in the wider sense, And it's for this reason that I actually think that artistic research, you know, if we understand it as within the humanities, has perhaps the most potential to actually intervene and introduce not just avant-garde, but other newnesses as well, maybe older newnesses, for example, if that makes any sense.
It does. Thank you, Trina. Barry had a quick comment, and you need to unmute. Oh, no.
Just very quickly, I was thinking, since Foucault has been mentioned twice, I have to throw in a little vote for Susan Sontag's 1964 essay, Notes on Camp. It's not an essay, it's a series of thoughts, which is exactly about this question of how you come to value a piece of art, which pushes out the boundaries of the way we think about valuing creative practice and creativity.
Thanks, Barry. Ines.
There is a question which follows up a little bit on what Yvonne has been saying on the doctorate as a place for experiment. So expanding a little bit more on that. And there's also a comment on how it should be possible to make bad work that is good research. So the question is there perhaps not a divide with how institutions think of art versus what art as research is set out to do? So is this dissonance that we keep facing ourselves with as experimenting, making bad art, but making good research, and how institutions look at that divide? Or whether we might assume that that divide is there because that comes with a sense of embodied knowledge for us as practitioners. So these are kind of two questions that are in the air. Yvonne, maybe you'd like to pick up on that and expand on what you were saying earlier.
So this is a really interesting conundrum, and I think it's one that academia negotiates with the value systems of artistic practice regularly, and vice versa. So the question, there are lots of layers to the question. So I'll talk about my view regarding the relationship between experimentation and potentially bad art, and what that means in terms of someone passing or failing a PhD, so to speak. I have examined 11 practice-inclusive PhDs now that range across a lot of types of aesthetic output. And I so far have not experienced a rigorously pursued PhD where the only result of the experiment was a form of failure. The exception to that was in quotation marks for you that might not have seen my fingers doing this in the air. So if a PhD is pursued with rigor and passion, it's very rare that the aesthetic product is somehow bad. However, when people create bad work, in other words, work that is somehow not living up to a form of seemingly socially agreed measures of artistic quality, the person articulates the learning from that and articulates what it means to and how this work that they may themselves feel failed challenges notions of what success in art is in the first place. You know, theater is littered. I mean, all the arts are littered with the people who were called failures until suddenly they were successes, or were called aesthetic of no aesthetic value until suddenly whatever they were doing became something that was appreciated or seen as avant-garde or valued suddenly because its historicity was becoming revalued. I think there's no formulaic answer to what that means. I think what needs to happen a lot of the time is articulating why having space to explore failure, even if you don't fail, but having the space to explore failure, articulating why that matters to arts councils, to venues, who want a product that is reflective of their success as quickly as possible for different reasons. It's also worth saying that different disciplines have really different approaches to this. Like and the performative disciplines have a very strange relationship with failure, a different kind of relationship, sometimes than relationship, say, a conceptual visual artist might have with the phenomenon that we can call failure. And let's just remember, on an academic level, hard scientists fail all the time. Their experiments bottom out. They don't get good results. They even publish about their bad results and their failures. To me, academia should be a space where learning from failure is actually valued, and that it's up to us to defend the value of that process to the wider constituency of knowledge builders.
Thank you, Yvonne. Did anybody else want to come back on that? Okay. It's a really interesting question, and I particularly take from the discussion here something potentially about the context of Ireland, which is quite distinctive, which may be that interweaving of neunesses, as you speak about, Triana, that combine both contemporary experimental practices, but also traditional arts and the ways in which they challenge what should be or what shouldn't be within the academy, and that how that might make itself felt within the artistic doctorate is really compelling, I feel. Ines.
Tackling on to that, there is a question which it is for you, Jules, in terms of how this project is situated. The question is, would you say that the politics of artistic doctors in Ireland are currently protecting the knowledge and supporting artistic discourse instead of being in favor of theoretical discourse? So I think this is exactly where this project is coming in.
So I don't I should probably read the question, but I don't quite understand the question. The second part of it?
So the question is whether the politics of artistic doctors in Ireland protect and acknowledge and support artistic practice currently.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that's a really interesting question. And I suppose, as you say, Ines, that's the whole research project. Now, we've ended up doing this project in the middle of a kind of global pandemic and social crisis in terms of Black Lives Matter movement, and both of those things come together around breathing and around the inability to breathe, either through a virus or through police violence, and the broader issues there to do with diversity and context. So within our Irish context, we have had a situation in which we have had an election in February, and we have only just got a government a few days ago. We have a much longer history within Ireland of colonial history and challenge in terms of our relationship with the North, and what that means for kind of contemporary politics. So I think the particular context in terms of the artistic doctorate relates to the Irish context in a way that Ireland punches above its weight often within the professional fields of artistic practice. And very often there have been a history of artists within the academy, if we're looking back 20, 30 years. And often that's been poets, which is beyond the remit of this particular research project, but a very important part of the artistic research doctorate landscape, but also music. And so there is a generosity around having artists within the academy, and a curiosity that I think is distinctly different to some other jurisdictions, and notably possibly the UK. And so whilst the arts have been powerfully affected above many other disciplines, other kind of areas of public life through the COVID-19 pandemic, there is also particular sensitivity and understanding and curiosity about it. Within our own institution, we're currently developing an arts and culture strategy, and there has been genuine curiosity about what artistic research is, and we've used that language intentionally to try to kind of frame what has been called many different names within a European context. and that's both strategic and interested in developing a distinctive version for Ireland. Did Trina or Barry, did you want to come in on that in terms of the distinctiveness of Ireland and the contemporary political situation in relation to the Artistic Doctorate? Trina?
Yeah, I suppose I won't make too many pronouncements on contemporary politics, lest I run away with myself within this forum. However, I think in relation to the overall scene, I think that I would agree with Jules that there is a real sense of value around the arts in Ireland, and I think that even on a government level, it's often, you know, part of an outward performance of Irishness in a very fundamental way. Even when you get to kind of quite bureaucratic decisions and so forth, the discourse of artistry, and of course this is not an uncomplicated discourse within colonial history more generally, is still very much attached to how Ireland presents itself to the world. And we see with you know, artistic funding and so forth, that the traditional arts, which Jules referred to, are valued highly. And one of the things that I think is distinctive is that there is a particular value around community-based and regional practices. And so, for example, regional styles of traditional music and dance, even though unfortunately regional styles of dance are receding extremely rapidly and are in danger of disappearing entirely in many places, that regionality is highly valued. And I think that's something that will be very useful in this context, because that discourse is already there. So you have these kind of different regional expressions, and their differences valued. And I think that that is important. What I'm interested in relation to a larger political context is how this will feed into a larger conceptualization of diasporic arts within Ireland. So for new communities in Ireland, for example, one of my own students did collaborative work with Lithuanian singers in North Cork, for example, who practice an oral tradition. I think that in a political sense, that is a very important space. And so we'll see how that develops, but I would be hopeful that that will develop over the coming years. But I think that there is a real potential here for something very distinctive and a genuine contribution. Yvonne mentioned weirdness in another capacity earlier on, and I think Ireland, because of its really liminal position, its particular history as a colonized country and colonized communities and so forth, occupies this interesting in-between liminal and weird space. And I suppose this is, I did say I wasn't going to comment on politics, and that's basically all I've done since I started talking, but there we have it. But I think because of that, I think that there is an element of where everything trembles in the balance in a Turnerian sense about what this will produce from within an Irish context. I think I might have gone far from your question there, Jules, but there you have it.
No, it's really helpful. We're getting towards, thank you, Trina. We're getting towards the end of our time. Ines, do we have maybe one last question that we could respond to before we close? I can't hear you.
Apologies, unmute. There is one last question coming in terms of what is it that we mean when we talk about artistic quality? Is there a norm in the doctoral context of the performing arts of what artistic quality is?
That's a very challenging question, quite a hard one to end on. Yvonne, did you want to come in on that?
There is no definition of artistic quality, according to me. There is no definition that everyone can agree on of what artistic quality is. And certainly across disciplines or in transmedial work, like most theater is, and like most dance is that is examined in a live format, this question comes up again and again and again and again and again, and it comes up in really interesting contexts. You know that some countries measure the quality of research outcomes as a funding mechanism. The UK does that to institutions, Australia does it, New Zealand does it. There are movements to try to do it in other locations that are being contested. And it's just contentious because discussing artistic quality is always rife with subjectivities. It's just always rife with them. We can't escape it. This is why I try to use other terms like a rigor, you know, someone pursuing. I think as somebody who is representing on the panel accidentally, you know, I wasn't asked to, but I'm representing a kind of queering studies strand within the artistic research paradigm. You know, so much of the history of queered forms of performance or outsider performance has been precisely undoing or not doing or doing the exact opposite of what the tastemakers say is actually tasteful. So it's a really interesting set of questions, and there's no clear answer to it until one arrives at examination point. And I think that's where it's really important for examiners to be and supervisors to be simultaneously rigorous, generous, and experimental in what they're doing. And that's just really hard. It's really hard, but it's also what makes what we do a lot more fun than a lot of other disciplines.
Thank you, Yvonne. Okay, everyone, I'm going to round up. So thank you to my panelists here, and thank you very much, all attendees. We have people from Australia, from Singapore, from Europe, and we really appreciate you coming. Please come again on Thursday. Most weeks, the seminar is on a Thursday, with the odd Tuesday. This is one of those weeks. So we have Paolo de Assis coming on Thursday, who's going to speak specifically about artistic research in music. Triana will be chairing that session, and we look forward very much to seeing you then. I would also point you to our website, artisticdoctoratesireland.com, and we'll be posting regular updates there. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.